Yeah.
Thanks everyone for coming to the event tonight. We've got a very familiar crowd today. It's very fun. Good to hear everybody coming together. Lots of familiar faces, few new faces. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm Michael, event host at RJ Julia. We're joined tonight by Daisy Alpert Florin and Suzanne Kingsbury to discuss the new book, My Last Innocent Year. After a brief introduction, we'll hear from Daisy and Suzanne. We'll have a period for questions from the audience. And immediately after the event, we'll have a book signing where you can have your copy signed by Daisy. We also have a couple of copies of Suzanne's book also. Daisy Alpert Florin attended Dartmouth College and received graduate degrees from Columbia University and Bank Street Graduate School of Education. She began her career working in book publishing and has also worked as a teacher, including several years teaching preschool. She's a recipient of the 2016 Catherine Gurpain Writing Fellowship at Sarah Lawrence College and was a 2019-2020 fellow in the Bookends Novel Revision Fellowship. Native New Yorker, Daisy lives in Connecticut with her family. My Last Innocent Year is her first novel. Suzanne Kingsbury is an award-winning author whose books have been translated widely abroad and optioned for film and mentioned by a couple of our booksellers already. They remembered and knew who you were. In 2008, she founded Gateless Writing, a literary arts organization I think a few of you are familiar with, based on creative brain science and ancient Zen, offering retreats, career trainings, a post-grad academy, and a worldwide sanctuary for emerging and seasoned writers. Now, Daisy and Suzanne.
Thanks, you guys, for coming. I feel like we're in like a little living room. I have to say, it was not easy to get into RJ Julia when I was a blossoming writer. So I was like, went right into RJ Julia when Daisy's book was coming out and said, there's a writer who's coming out with a book that's like really good. You guys are going to want her here because her book is going to take off. And they were like, okay, well, duly noted, and then Daisy called me and she's like, oh yeah, they've already asked me to come. So I knew that her book was going to do really well because RJ Julia has a magic touch with books. Like if they've already chosen the book, they know that it's going to just soar. And it has. I mean, we were just talking, the book launched yesterday. It is already #1 on Kindle for Amazon. It has a 9-week waiting list on the library, getting it from the library. So don't get it from the library. Because if you have her sign a first edition, it will probably be worth something. So we're in the Uber last night coming. This is her first launch in Connecticut. So she's launching today in Connecticut. We launched last night in New York, and we're coming home in the Uber with her husband Ken, talking to Oliver on the phone, her son, and the film people were already emailing her saying that they're setting up meetings for her. So you're meeting someone that's like right on the brink of like being a household name. So it's very exciting. I'm just curious, like, how you're feeling right now. Like, how does it feel to have this book that's just it's taking off? I mean, right away.
It's amazing. I mean, that's like crazy. Thank you for saying all that. Yeah, it's really exciting. I mean, I think there's a lot of writers here who know how long it takes to write something and how long you work alone and in silence and anonymity, and then it feels like a dream, right? It's like last night I was very nervous at this launch, and I was like, okay, like you're here, like this is happening, like take it in, this will never happen again, just like be here, don't be like nervous and like your head going, in a zillion directions. So it's really exciting. I'm so glad to be here, and thank you, Suzanne, Suzanne and I have been friends for a while, so this feels like a very easy conversation. We talk about books all the time, so we'll talk about mine tonight.
Yeah. So it was like, oh, I have so much to say about the book because you guys It is so good. It's like compulsively readable. And I was saying to Daisy, it really feels when you're reading it, like you're binging a Netflix series. Like you're just like, oh my God, what's gonna happen? You know what I mean? You just can't wait to find out what's gonna happen. So I do want to say, like, what's fascinating about the book to me, knowing, because Daisy and I have known each other since 2014. When she came on a Gateless retreat. And I remember the moment I met her and like standing in the hallway with her. And once she read in that circle in retreat, it was like you could have heard a pin drop. It was just like, wow, this person has it. You know what I mean? Like she's really got it, whatever that thing is. But the novel is very spicy. Like it's very salacious. Like you can't wait to get to the next part of it. And yeah, your life days is like something that we all can relate to, right? You have 3 kids, you live in Greenwich, you're married to happily married. Like, so when were you able to drop into that place of like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna write this page turning, like very tight, high stakes, you know what I mean? Like, how did that happen?
Well, it didn't really start out like very page turning, I don't think, like first drafts of things can be like a little bit draggy and just like pages of people talking to each other and nothing really happening. So like over time, as I wrote, things like in terms of plot points, like became more clear to me. But I think that I did, other things in my life, and then I had my kids and I was home and I started to write. And first I was writing personal essays about, my kids, and I was writing personal essays about myself. And then like at a certain point, I kind of wanted to start writing about things, like I wanted a bigger runway, right? Like essays, if you're a writer, you write essays, maybe 800 words, 1200 words. I would write these like 5,000 word essays that were like really hard to publish, basically, because like outlets don't really publish like 5,000 word essays that much. So anyway, so I wanted like a longer runway to like tell a bigger story, like a story that hadn't happened to me, but was maybe something that I could imagine happening, something I wanted to talk about, things that I had observed in the culture, growing up and seeing things, hearing stories. So the novel became just like a way to capture both of those things. But I also was like in a place in my life where I had 3 kids. I was like living like a stable life. I had like that stability under me so that I could go there, like go to that, risky, crazy place that you need to go to make art, and also to write a story that is kind of dangerous, where things are happening that are dangerous. And for me, I needed to feel like very safe and very grounded to be able to do that. Like my kids were coming home at 3:00, we had to like go to ballet or, whatever. It was like, I think that has helped me tremendously. And I also wasn't, 25 years old and like trying to figure out who I was. I felt like pretty, but through the course of the writing, I found out more who I was. It's also, been like 8 years. So I'm like, it takes, like, I've learned a lot about myself in the process, but yeah, I think that just being like in a grounded, like feeling safe for me was like what I needed to make, to do this thing, which like looking back, maybe was always something I was going to do. I just didn't really know it, but I had so much like uncertainty in my life, it's like you're, graduate from school and you have to make a living and you're trying to figure out all this stuff. And that's like a really hard time to, people do it all the time, write books when they're young. You did that, younger, like a fresh young thing. And I admire that. That was not my path.
Yeah. And it's nice that you're grounded now when you're in the tour, because I think the tour can be, especially when you get that sort of runaway bestseller, it's like it can be very overwhelming if you're young. So Daisy, can you set the book up for us? Like tell us sort of the premise of it and then maybe read a little bit.
Yeah, I'll tell you the premise and then I'm going to read a little short scene. So the book is set in 1998 at a fictional college in New Hampshire called Wilder. And the main character is named Isabel Rosen, and she's in her final semester of college. She is a bit of an outsider at this kind of posh, New England college. She's from New York. She's from the Lower East Side, kind of the pre-hipster Lower East Side. Her father owns an appetizing store, which is a kind of Jewish specialty food store. Yes, someone is nodding, where they sell like herring and smoked fish. Yeah, so that's what her father does, which is an unusual thing, in this setting. But she's kind of figured it out. She's a senior now. And right at the start of the novel, she has what I'll call a very unpleasant sexual encounter with someone who's a peer who she thought was a friend. And it kind of rattles her and sets her off balance for this final semester, where then she proceeds to fall into a romance, an affair with her writing professor. And that's kind of the premise of the novel. So the little scene I'm going to read right now is from the first chapter, so she's had this unpleasant encounter with her friend. She comes back to her dorm room and finds her roommate, who is her good friend named Deborah. And Deborah is a bit of is an activist, an activist on campus. These are the 90s. And she hears Isabel's story and wants to retaliate against this young man. At 21, Deborah was already an experienced vandal. As editor of her high school yearbook, she'd embedded messages throughout the pages. Silence equals death. My body, my choice. I believe Anita. A code of resistance you could read only if you knew where to look. Within weeks of arriving on campus freshman year, she'd organized a Take Back the Night march. But when the reaction to it was tepid, she decided she wasn't interested in anything school sanctioned. So one night that winter, we ran around campus putting tacky bras from Victoria's Secret on every male statue on campus. Or as Deborah pointed out, every statue on campus. The next day, we watched campus security remove them, doubled over with laughter as they fiddled awkwardly with the class. Later that year, a group of us plastered campus with stickers that read, "Women are everywhere," and women is spelled with a Y. We stuck them on everything: buildings, lampposts, soda machines, frat house doors. This stunt was more controversial. Some of the stickers, including the one we put on the college president's car, couldn't be removed, not easily at least. There was a flurry of pointed op-eds in the school newspaper, talk of vandalism charges, but no one could prove it was us. In the end, I don't know what made people angrier, the vandalism or the word women. Why? Sophomore year, Deborah swiped the ID of a guy rumored to be groping girls at parties, and we taped copies of it on the mirrors of every bathroom on campus. The guy's parents threatened a lawsuit, but backed off after a dozen girls came forward to accuse him. He still graduated with us, became a member of the alumni council, signs his names to cheery annual appeals for donations to the class fund. It was around that time that we started calling ourselves the Crush Girls, a name that made us sound more official and more menacing than what we really were, a loose affiliation of Deborah and me and whoever else we could scare up on a particular night. Crush Girl activity flatlined after Deborah founded Bitch Slap, Wilder's first and only feminist journal, but she still talks sometimes about reviving it and pulling off something big. I'd always gone along with Deborah's stunts because they were fun and because she was happy to take whatever consequences they reaped. So far, to my relief and Deborah's chagrin, none had. All of which is to say, I wasn't surprised when she pulled out a can of spray paint. She pulled a can of spray paint out of her backpack when we got to Zev's door. It felt strange to be back there so soon, and I distracted myself by wondering if the universe existed where I was on both sides of Zev's door, like Schrodinger's cat. Deborah shook the can, and the sound was huge in the silent hallway. I didn't know who was still around and who had already left for winter break, so I looked up and down the hall nervously, willing the doors to stay closed. Let's keep it simple, shall we? Deborah popped off the top, and I watched as she wrote the word rapist in big red letters across Zev's door. Holy shit, I whispered. Not bad, right? After she touched up the letters, wiping off drips of paint with her sleeve, we stood there, basking in the glory of what we had done, what Deborah had done. I felt giddy and nervous, my stomach dancing in a way that made it impossible to separate the feelings. The word on Zev's door was bad and bold, but for a moment at least, felt right. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes as I thought about what Deborah had done for me. Deborah, my avenging angel. She looked back at me and smiled, and in that instant, she'd never looked more beautiful. The sound of a doorknob being turned jostled me out of my reverie. The door opened, and Zev poked out his head, blinking into the light. His thick glasses were slightly askew, as if he'd just pulled them on.
So it's a campus novel in the
Yeah.
90s.
Yeah.
And the Monica Lewinsky Clinton thing is like happening
Yeah.
during this. Why did you decide on a campus? Like, what is it about that like helped the stakes feel high and all that?
So I didn't really set out to write a campus novel, and campus novels have are kind of a thing, like a little bit of a literary subgenre, and people really like them. Or I guess not everybody, but there are people who like them, and I've always liked them. There's The Secret History by Donna Tartt is kind of like the OG campus novel, and Prep by Curtis Sittenfeld, and there are just a lot of them. And I'd always really liked them, probably because I went to college and, I had that experience, felt familiar to me. I had really started writing the novel, when after I turned 40, and I was kind of in this moment of oh, I'm not young anymore. I'd sort of shifted into this other moment in my life. And I just started to think back to my youth and how things felt very open then. There was just a lot of possibility. And so I kind of think if you've gone to college, being in college is kind of like being in a novel. It's things can happen at any moment. It's you take that class and it changes your life, or you decide to go to a party at the last minute and changes your life. And you never know who you're gonna bump into around the corner, or online in the dining hall or something. So there was something just very cinematic for me about that time of my life. So I kind of just went back there, and it was so vivid to me. I could remember so much about it. But then the more I started to think about it, it's well, why does the campus work for a novel, right? So a novel is something that, it's a story that's under pressure, right? The last week, the cop in his last week on a job, something's going to go down, or, the final Christmas they spend in the house, before they're going to sell it, so it's that idea of something coming to an end kind of creates drama, heightens tension. And college is that, even though you're not really aware of it at the time. I don't remember being in college and ever thinking oh, it's almost over. It's just you're there. But it's a ticking clock that's going from the moment you step foot on that campus. Are you gonna get what you set out there to get, and if not, how can you do it in those last months? So there's that pressure. And then I also made it a very small campus. It's in this small town in New Hampshire, and it's kind of sort of isolated from everything else, and it's a limited population, right? So you're gonna bump into everyone. You're just gonna if there's someone you're trying to avoid, that's gonna be kind of hard. And if there's someone you want to bump into, you probably will. So there's that. And then there's also a lot of different ages on the campus. So this book's, it's set in that final semester, and Isabel, the main character, is trying to like understand, like, well, I'm about to leave, so I'm gonna be an adult now. And so when am I gonna get that like information that will be given to me to like make it clear that, oh, this is the information that adults get. So she's watching the adults around her, and the adults around her are pretty much falling apart. So you also are like up close and personal with that. There's like a big scene that takes place at a party at a professor's house. And I never went to a party like the one I describe in the book like that, but I remember going to, like, you go to the professor's house, and it's like, oh, they had like a house, and they had like, like a coffee urn, or like wine glasses, or a dining table, like they had all these things, and like you just had nothing. So yeah, so it's like you're seeing all this stuff, and the campus like was just a good container for drama. It just creates a lot of drama. And it was just really fun to go, to go back, like if you went to college and you liked that college experience. It was fun to kind of like reimagine yourself walking those paths again. But now I had the wisdom of this age. So it's like, oh, I can see everything that I couldn't really see then.
Yeah, and the book is like so beautifully and perfectly structured. And there's, in the architecture of a book, there's like this middle place in the book where the character makes a decision, right? And that decision is going to decide their entire fate. It's like, or something happens where you realize like, oh my God, this is the moment that the book, the precipice upon which the book is sort of turning, you know what I mean? And after this point, the narrator is never going to be the same again. And once you kind of know this, you're looking for it. And the more poignant that moment is, I think, in a book, the better the book. The more sort of like the more impact the book is going to have on you forever. And there's this moment on page, I think it's 163, where it like you're just like, oh my God. And it's like beautifully written, but also your heart stops, where you're just like, wow, you understand something about that character, that she's inside something because she's so young and so innocent and beautiful, and like sort of taking these risks and thinking like, wow, I wonder what will happen if I do this. And you're like, oh, it's life, because it is a retrospective. There's an author looking back at the narrator in a way in the book. She's looking back on herself then. She does, at the end, you realize, oh my God, that thing that happened on 163 is like really happening now. Like it really does make an impact. So I just am curious, like, how much was the book kind of pulling, it feels like the book was just like a wild stallion, and you're like, okay, I'm coming. Because it reads like that. But did it sort of like things happen while you were writing? They were like, oh, I guess that's gonna happen now.
I mean, yes, definitely there were things where like I was like, oh, if you're a writer, then there's a lot of writers here, you write things, you sort of surprise yourself with something that comes out, and you weren't really planning that, and all of a sudden it sounds crazy. It's like, oh, this character he just emerged, like there was, he was just there. But I mean, definitely the book was I feel like the book is tight now, but it was like not tight for a very, 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 very long time. It was very like loose and baggy, and I was writing into all these corners that ended up being kind of dead ends that I had to write my way back out of. So I mean, I think like that retrospective voice that you're talking about, because there's like a very clear point from which Isabel is narrating the book, and there are times where that like older voice interjects into the narrative, and I just really liked doing that. I felt like it was sort of a way to give like empathy to the younger character, and just like, yeah, you're about to make a big mistake that that you can't really see, but like you're gonna be okay, what I mean? Like that's just, I think, what happens in your life. It's like make the best decisions with the information that you have. And the theme in the book that Isabel like repeats over and over again is like I chose to believe this thing. I chose to believe a thing.
Yeah.
Because I do think that that is ultimately like what we do in life. You know, we're not always going to have clarity around everything. We're not always going to know the truth about everything. We can't be really sure, you know, what happened that night or what really happened between our parents or what brought them together or what drove them apart. But we just like create the story that makes sense to us.
Yes.
So that we can like go on, you know. There have been yeah, I think that the book is told like from I think it's fiery, so I'm glad to hear it described that way, but it's kind of not told from like the heat of the flame. It's told from like the ashes. It's told from like the cooling ashes. So that was the only way that I could really tell it. But I think to like maintain, like to write from the heat of the flame through carry that through a whole book would be really, really exhausting to write. And I think it can be exhausing to read.
Yeah. No, I love that.
Yeah.
Do you guys have questions for
Yeah.
her? I've been talking a lot, so. So, if you have questions.
I've got one, get started. Interesting, so like so many good books, you have the main theme, right? What you read on the cover, but I found that there were so many other interesting themes and moments in the book beyond like the principal story. I'm curious, like what some of those scenes that were most significant or maybe more personal to you that
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, Isabel is from this family with her dad who owns this store. And so she comes from that background. Her mother has died. Her mother died. So Isabel's a senior, but her mother died like right before she left for college. So she kind of like came into college from this like weakened position. And that loss has also contributed to her feeling like an outsider at this college. But so it's just her and her dad comes from this very different world. He's like wears an apron and like has a wax crayon behind his ear, and he like opens the store every day and closes the store every day. There's like a lot of regularity to his life. And so, you know, but of course, because she's a young person, she doesn't think her father is very interesting, or, you know, she's like enamored with these like professors and all these kind of fancy intellectual people that she's around. And not to give anything away, but, you know, she ultimately does come to see her father as a flawed person, but that, you know, that love story is really, I think, with the father. So those scenes were really important to me, because I wanted her to be really grounded, because there is something that, like, you know, despite the decisions that she makes, you know, she has that like foundation, which maybe is what prevents her from completely, you know, torching her life. So not to give anything away, but anyway, she is writing it from a place where, you know, you kind of know right away that, you know, she's okay. So those scenes were really important to me. And I loved like kind of you know, I'm from New York, and when I was growing up, we always used to go down to those stores on the Lower East Side, like Katz's Deli and Coastars Bialys, and they do still exist. And it is like a whole other world. It's kind of like fun to imagine like that world just juxtaposed with like this Ivy League college kind of setting. So that was a big thing for me.
Yeah. So I'm fascinated by transformation. And I think college for most of us was a place of transition. And what a beautiful way of looking at our lives in terms of how was I before something happened, and how was I more innocent with that, and then how have I changed with that? And I think it's, you know, you can look at that at almost all different crossroads in our lives, right? I was thinking about that. You said you were running this 8 years ago.
Yeah.
The country was in the middle of turmoil, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost as if, I don't want to get political because that's dangerous, but we've kind of lost the innocence that we had before the man we won't talk about, the president. And and then COVID and all these things, and we're living you know, I think about it often with the shoe bomber, that everything has changed with flying after the shoe bomber. And we had an innocence before that. We had innocence before 9/11. We had an innocence before divorce. We had an innocence before all these different things that happened. And they happen and we grow and we change. But there's something so powerful and poignant about thinking about the innocence that we might have lost, but also what we gained through it as well, right? And
Yeah.
what was going on in the world part of the thought process in your head?
I mean, yes, I mean, I think college like is, you know, novels, any like story, essay, novel has to chart change, right? Like you want to see the main character or something has to change, otherwise it doesn't really feel like very satisfying. So college is change, you know, like whether you're like ready to be an adult and like be out in the world, like I don't think necessarily, but you know, you come in as one person and you leave as somebody else, and you have had experiences, good, bad, ugly, you know, that have changed you. So I think that's very true. I mean, I think like I did start writing the novel in like 2015, and it was before those things that we will not speak of, but you know, like it was before that, you know, I was kind of like doing sort of a personal excavation of like how had my life sort of like, you know, just what I was feeling at that time and where I felt like I had started and where I was now, and how like, you know, culture had maybe shaped that or not. But then all that stuff was in the like coming out every day, and I did feel like an urgency, like, oh, this story feels like even more like I have to tell this story. Like the world is like pushing in on the book. I mean, I actually had like a whole section, like it's basically set, you know, it's set in 1998, but I had like this alternate, like a second timeline where it's like 2016 and she's like goes back and all of that. And I think that was just me trying to like not lose my mind and sort of like, you know, create something out of that. But ultimately that part fell away from the book because like I needed to write it, but it didn't actually need to be in the book. But yeah.
But what's interesting about thinking about the narrator sort of in 2016, looking back at this, is that so many of us woke up in the hashtag Me Too and realized like, oh, what was that relationship that I had with that professor? Like maybe that was very different than what I was conceptualizing, because the culture was allowing us to conceptualize it as abuse, as something that was untoward and that was maybe not okay. So I did see that iteration because, you know, because we worked a little bit on the book, and it was like, there was an obvious reason, but then sometimes the novel can't support those two stories, right? So it's like that's there in the white space kind of, but the waking up, you can imagine that might have been when she woke up and was like, oh, Zeb and Connery was the professor, like that. I know now. I know now what that was, which is also very painful.
Yeah.
I think, to wake up and the only thing we can sometimes do is tell our stories.
And I also think so many people went to college, and so many women, I mean, there's a statistic that a third of women going to college have been raped in college. So you're speaking to so many women who might not have the voice to speak what you're giving them, but you might be giving them a voice of sorts in terms of, which I think is such a fabulous thing.
Yeah.
I'm really curious, how conscious were you of the impact of Clinton Lewinsky? Because it's an interesting segue, because I remember when that happened, to me, it was like, talk about innocence being bursting open. Reading about cigars and blowjobs in the New York Times. And then, oh my God, I'm raising a child. So to me, that was like, I was wondering how conscious you were of that. That I thought was.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, yeah, so the book is like set at that, you know, the winter of 1998 when the I like to call it the Clinton scandal.
Yeah,
Give her a break. But you know, when that scandal broke, and the, you know, it kind of touches down a little bit through the novel. It's not like a big massive thing, because I don't think like I wasn't actually in college in 1998, but I don't think like, you know, we didn't have our Twitter and like our phones. Like we probably, you know, I don't think people were probably talking about it, those like real political junkies, but I don't think it was probably something that everyone was as aware of all the time. But I actually when I was revising the novel, I went back and listened to this podcast called Slow Burn, which has this like 8-part like deep dive into the Clinton Lewinsky scandal, because I like knew about it, but I didn't like really remember everything, and that was like really informative. So I recommend that if you're interested in that kind of stuff. But there was like the other thing that was interesting about that was like the way that different generations viewed that scandal, right? So like Isabel is like maybe Gen X, you know, and then but the generation that was one generation older, though that like generation of feminists were like, well, you know what, she was consenting and this was like what she wanted, and if we take away her agency, then we kind of infantilize her and we say that women can't like make choices about their bodies, about their sexuality. And so I think like, you know, as a like next generation feminist, I was like, okay, I see that, I get that. But now I think we've come around on that, you know. Monica Lewinsky sort of made her TED Talk, like her reappearance in like 2014. And I think we all were like, wait a minute, like that was really messed up, you know, like, so could she consent to that relationship? She gave her consent to that relationship, but like, could she really give her consent? Like, did she know what she was consenting to? I don't really like have an answer to that, right? But in other words, some adults in the room should have stopped what was going on, whether it was him or some of the people around him. You know, it was a very much, yeah, it was so I think that was a big loss of innocence for sure. And
Yeah, and I agree, it was a loss of innocence for all of us.
Yeah.
I mean, to hear, you know, the lying and the sort of that moment, I don't know if you guys remember that, but I remember the moment that he said, well, actually, I lied. I mean, even that was a loss of innocence, but also I think that question of like, what am I saying yes to is very much in this book. It's like, you don't know at that age, you think that you have a lot of agency, but that other person has so much experience. They have the grades on their side, this person is graduating, and you start to see the stakes that are involved when we say yes to anything sexual, really. I think it's like, who am I saying yes to, and what is this gonna do like to my life? And I think, you know, Barb saying like, this is a book that's written for all of us, is like, it's a seminal book about the gray area of like what can happen when, and also what has happened to all of us, you know, over our lives. And I think to be responsible for that as an author, you know, like the author is like, you know, the authority to be able to sort of write about something that is going to bring up a lot. Like Daisy was like, there's all these trigger warnings now in the book, which is so interesting because the book is compulsively readable. But in a way, I get it. Like, it's not shying away from those really hot areas where we really all want to go today.
We have, does anybody have, this a last question for Daisy? I've got one more for you.
Okay.
You're not off the hook yet. Oh, did you have?
Well, I do. I mean,
Yeah, go
without
ahead.
reading the book and not knowing, so I guess,
yeah,
is she just aimlessly experiencing things, or does she have a goal in mind? Could you talk a little bit about that? Or was there a reason why she chooses to engage in any of her choices?
yeah. I mean, I don't want to say.
Oh, I know, I don't want you to blow this.
No, I mean, I don't want to say that she's aimless, but I think there is like that youthful way that we do float from experience to experience, but when you're writing a character, like you don't want to make them too like fuzzy, you know. So I did try, and actually like when you first start writing like a character, it's easy to make them completely passive, or at least that's what I was doing. She was just like watching things and listening to things and hearing things, and ultimately you have to like give her something to do. So I will say that, you know, there are kind of these two encounters with men, and one is kind of non-consensual. That's she, and then the other one I worked to make her be more actively consensual in that one, because she is like driven by her desires, right? Like she is desirous, and she also, because she's like carrying this burden of, you know, of her family and like what they've kind of sacrificed for her to be in this position. Like she does have more of like a core of self-preservation about her than maybe someone who didn't have that kind of somebody like rooting for them and pushing them from a little bit from behind.
I just want to kind of make one more.
Yes,
I just
please.
want to, I had an aha moment earlier when you said, I felt grounded finally and I could finally just start to write. And I wonder if anybody else in the room relates this. I mean, I always tend to write sometimes when my life is chaotic and I'm trying to resolve some of this stuff that's going on
Yes.
in the characters and it messes everything up. So did you really feel complete, clean slate? Like,
Oh, no, I mean, I think that what you're saying is like, sometimes you do want to resolve things on the page, you know,
Yeah.
and sometimes like that writing that you do, like I wrote a lot just telling myself this story, like,
Mhm.
what is this story? What I don't know what it is until I write it down and working out a lot of things. And you have to do that, maybe some of it goes away,
Okay.
you know, but I think what I think what I meant was, like just sort of feeling like, you know, I'm safe, you know, like I can turn on the lights, like I know what I'm eating for dinner, or you
I
know,
see.
like that
Okay.
kind of thing.
Yeah,
like,
no,
it's
I get, okay.
yeah.
Well, no, I never write when I'm in a peaceful moment in my life. So I think sometimes it might be good. I don't know if that's what you meant. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, I have space now.
Yeah, but like you sometimes you write in that sort of way that you're describing to like get to that piece.
Okay, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, writing is fun. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you
Yeah,
for the
thank you.
comments.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for the
Thank you.
questions.
Okay,
And thank you,
great.
Daisy and Suzanne.
Thank you.
So we'll give them a chance to get some water. We'll set up for the signing table.
Yeah.
In the meantime, if you'd like to support Daisy and Suzanne, the store, you can pick up a copy of My Last Innocent Year. We have a few copies here and then at the register right here. We've got those and then come back in for the signing.